The park is cleared, it's secured. The protesters have moved out here onto the street.
And you are hearing or seeing on Converge Media some of the activity from Cal Anderson Park. Protesters dispersed by police on Friday of last week. What's next for that park? Other parks in the city? We're going to be talking about that and a whole lot more here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And my co-host, he's like the Jelly of the Month Club, keeps on giving the whole year round. That's Kevin Schofield from Seattle City Council Insight. Hello,
Kevin.
The
Month Club.
Yeah, that's I put you up next level, man.
A hidden comment about sort of my wiggling around a little bit.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's a compliment. The highest compliment I got. All right, we always like to give a shout out to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. It is the coffee stand, of course, on the first floor of City Hall. Closed during the pandemic, but John and Charlie, please hang in there. Can't wait to see them back open again. And a big thanks to our patrons on Patreon for helping us keep this show going. Eric and Jay joined us over the past week. Thank you both. We really do depend on the support of local independent journalism to keep this podcast alive. So please jump on board. And we're going to be talking about a very special gift for our patrons at the end of the podcast. So stay tuned for that. Finally, thanks to Converge Media, of course, Omari, Nikki, Victoria, making it happen with the video version of our podcast Wednesday nights at 6. Off we go with right here, right now. All right, so at the moment, as we are recording the show, basically, police have cleared out Cal Anderson Park. People are on the streets. Just some background here. This all came to a head when Seattle Parks tried to clean things up on Wednesday, December 16th. We're met with some threats, some resistance, some protesters eventually put up some barricades and hunkered down there. One of the people in the park actually filed a temporary restraining order to stop the city from clearing out that park. The restraining order failed. We'll talk about that in a minute. So the city was not prohibited by the U.S. District Court from clearing out the park. But before we get into that court case, Kevin, your thoughts on what you've been seeing? You were talking about this on Converge as it was happening. What did you observe about how police were handling this?
Well, yeah. So, this is interesting. So, this is actually a Parks Department operation, right?
That's right.
And the city's been very clear for the last few days that this is a Parks Department thing. The police are supporting, but it's not, police trying to manage a protest down or police clearing a homeless encampment. And, they may be splitting hairs a little bit on that.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
But,
doing some heavy maintenance work effort. Yeah.
The other big question that really comes up around this is why Cal Anderson Park and not any of the other parks that have homeless encampments in them? And what the mayor and others have been saying this week about that is that it's not about the encampment. It's about other illegal activity that's been going on there. They've been lighting fires there. They've barricaded themselves in this area. They've been, threatening physical harm on Parks Department employees have been trying to get into the park to do regular maintenance work there. Right. And the mayor has been saying that's just not acceptable. So that's the reason that they're sort of imminently going in trying to clean this, because they're worried about, the physical safety of people there. They're worried about, further property damage there. They're worried about fires getting lit. And, there's a tent fire there, recently. And they're really worried about the safety of parks employees.
Right. That's a big piece of this. And I do think about these other parks. I think it's important to recognize that I think Cal Anderson, just because of its history with CHOP or whatever else over the summer, is a different kind of a park. It's got that political side to it as well as the homeless encampment side. I think you recognize that too, right?
Yeah. And that was a really interesting issue that came up with relation to this effort to try to get a temporary restraining order by one of the residents of the encampment there in the park. For the first time in the court briefs they filed, they referred to what was going on there, not as a protest, and not as a homeless encampment, but as a protest encampment.
Right. And I know Mayor Durkin had mentioned that on KUOW too.
It's like, what does that mean? What's a protest encampment? For them, at least in the legal briefs, it was about trying to say, well, we get all the rights that come along with, First Amendment protected speech, as well as all the constitutional rights for, the homeless who, have to be somewhere, and they have sort of the constitutional right to just sort of be present in their body, right?
Yes,
do you get the union of those, right? If you're a protest encampment, and so it's just kind of this weird new step that they were trying to take on this.
Yeah, and the judge threw that out. I wanted to touch on this really quick. He didn't see that this case had merit. Can we touch on that before we talk about the future of other parks, please? What was your thought on what Judge Jones was saying about this?
So Judge Jones basically said, so in order to get a temporary restraining order, one of the things you have to do is you have to show that you're likely to succeed on the merits of your case, right? And in this case, he said, you presented basically no evidence for any of this stuff, right? For any of the, constitutional violations that you're charging. And so based upon that, I have to find that you're not likely to succeed on the merits of your case. You're making a bunch of baseless claims, at least from the point of view of what you've submitted so far in this case. And so I have to deny it on that basis. And he really didn't get to any of the other sort of questions that come along with a temporary restraining order, like, the balance of harms and is there irreparable harm and all that. You just kind of focus on that point. But that was really sort of the big weakness of that effort, was that they just hadn't produced evidence that the city was really violating their rights by doing this. And it comes back to a bunch of the issues that we've talked about over and over again about is the city offering shelter. They offered the woman plaintiff in this case shelter. They'd offered her a tiny home village unit in the past couple of weeks, and one of the weird twists and turns of this case over this week was that, in the midst of this being litigated in court, she accepted an offer for a tiny home village, unit. Yeah. Right. And was filling out the paperwork on Thursday morning for intake into that unit. Like, well, what does that mean if she's not even if she's not even residing in the park anymore?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I guess I am trying to take it next level, though. What does this mean for other parks? Because people are camping in parks all across the city. I've gotten a bunch of different emails, actually, from some of our patrons there that are saying, hey, Lower Woodland's got some issues here. I mean, it's all over the place. So does this have an impact, do you think, on other parks and how that work is done to try to, I guess, deal with people who are homeless and who are sleeping in these parks? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there are a couple pieces to this. One is not only was there illegal activity going on in this park, but I think we all have to admit that this is a place where the city was getting a lot of feedback from residents and businesses saying, "Hey, you've got to deal with this, right? Yeah. You can't just
international focus on that place too."
And that's always and particularly among city council members, this has always been sort of a big concern about, even with the navigation team. How does the city decide which encampments to clear?
Right.
Who gets swept? And is it just in the places where there are more complaints, or are there other concerns that are really driving it? Because if it's just like who's being loudest complaining about the encampments, it's probably not a good way to make these kinds of decisions. Yeah. So then there are considerations like can the city offer alternative shelter?
Sure. Right.
And some of those options are really getting better right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we are expanding tiny home villages.
Yep.
There's a lot of hoteling going on right now. The city is making just a new effort to make a couple hundred more hotel beds available. Like they've been leasing spaces in hotels.
Yep.
And in fact, they've been the city and the county have been trying to buy hotels.
That's
so they can have kind of longer term space to do this, which works really, really well. And that's the kind of thing where whereas like a space and enhanced shelter may or may not get taken up by a good person, you offer them a hotel room, and the rate of take up for that is super, super high. So that's actually something that's very attractive right now, and it's making a big difference.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about co-lead, which is using some of those tactics as well to get people off the street as well. So we're going to talk about that later in the podcast. But I did want to talk about a related piece here, and I know it's kind of playing out in front of our eyes here, Kevin. This idea of the Seattle Police Department working on revising its use of force and crowd control policies. An assistant chief was working with the Community Police Commission on this to discuss some of the changes. The process didn't start all that well, and this is on SEC Insight that you reported this. The CPC wanted some details of the policies. The SPD said, wait, let's get some feedback from the Office of Police Accountability and Inspector General by January 8th. So a bit of a kerfuffle on that one, but I do want to get to the bottom line here. You did this deep dive here. What are you seeing with this, Kevin? The CPC, the OPA, the OIG made some recommendations back in August. How is the Seattle Police Department responding with these different policies they're proposing here?
Right. So there's at least a dozen different policies that are all sort of collected together in the police policy manual for how they operate. They're working on two right now. They're working on the use of force policy, and mostly it's a bunch of sort of incremental changes in that. Right. Again, based upon, as you said, feedback coming from, the feedback they got from the OPA, CPC, OIG, the police monitor, the DOJ back in August. But then they're also they've basically done a major rewrite on the crowd control and crowd management policy, with a lot of that feedback in it. So use of force, they've added a couple new what they call less lethal weapons in there, pepper ball, launchers and things like that, and revised the rules on blast balls and some minor, and then on the crowd control, and like I said, it is a big major rewrite with different principles in there, different approaches, really codifying some of the things over the last couple of months they've been putting in place in terms of new ways to de-escalate a lot of what's going on. So there's a lot of work going on now. So what happened over the last few weeks is that SPD sort of quietly sent these out to the different accountability groups saying, give us your feedback.
Sure.
Please, we'd appreciate if you didn't sort of circulate these really widely, but we want to hear you first.
But
we get all that feedback by January 8th. And then in January, we're going to sort of sit down with all of you and have a big conversation where we can look at everybody's feedback together and say, this is how to go forward. And on December 2nd, Assistant Chief Cordner presented that to the CPC and said, I'll be back in 2 weeks and we can sort of, if you got questions at that point, we can talk about that. And when she said, if you got questions, what she really meant was, if you have clarifying questions about like, what do you mean when you say this? Or like, this paragraph, I didn't quite understand that. That level of clarifying questions. That's what she thought she was going to get. And what she got was really big questions. Like, we've been telling you blast balls are bad and you should ban them for 5 years.
So
now.
What's up with this?
Why are you not banning? And so she came back and said, ooh, if that's the kind of question you're asking, let's not do this follow-up clarifying question thing. And we'll talk in January on that. And the CPC didn't like that. And so that was what the kerfuffling was about. Last week. And but there's a larger point that the CPC is pushing on, which is a really good one, which is these are the big two, right? Of all these different policies, right now where we are and the issues going on, everything from George Floyd on, there's a written change in the use of force policy now, explicitly prohibiting all knee holds. Sorry, neck hold. Knee to neck holds.
Knee to the neck. Yep.
And so use of force, what's allowed, and crowd control are the two big issues right now. It's not just a matter of like the CPC and these other bodies giving feedback to SPD and they'll really sort of incorporate that. It's like we should be having a citywide conversation on this. There needs to be an open forum.
And who facilitates
and the CPC
that?
is really right about that. So who organizes that? Is SPD going to do that with CPC?
Does the council get involved?
In our accountability system, the CPC is supposed to be the voice of the community. Is it the CPC's responsibility to go do that? What exactly is SPD's expectations for what outreach they're going to do? So I've been talking to them over the last few days about this. And one of the things they did was, knowing that I and some other reporters were about to sort of publish all these things, they kind of beat us to the punch by put them out themselves with a link to an online survey where you can answer 3 questions about what you think about this policy.
Sure.
Which is, it's a good start to get, and they've told me they're already getting some good feedback off of that. But do there need to be some bigger public forums that they have sort of precinct by precinct community advisory boards?
Sure.
They told me that they're looking at sort of how they can leverage those to try to have some communications about this. I think the CPC is going to have their own ideas as well. So I think we're going to see over the next few weeks that play out a little bit more.
I'm looking forward to that conversation. I think we've got some issues because Judge Jones has just been talking about this when it comes to policies with blast balls and whatever else. Incorporating that is going to be a big piece of this, trying to figure out this whole debate over, and it's not a debate really, but looking at these twin goals of trying to protect lives and trying to protect property, how those come together here. So a ton of issues still ahead. Thanks for the deep dive on this, Kevin. We'll hear a lot more when stuff happens on Elvis's birthday, January 8th. We'll get that coming up next year. So let's move on to our next topic here. Now hear this. Okay, so this is where we roll a soundbite your way from the week prior and break down the treasure of political insight hidden within it. This time around, it's a look at the expansion of LEAD, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, a program that provides alternatives for booking people into jail, especially when they're dealing with behavioral health problems or poverty. Now, LEAD has gone through some changes over the past couple months, which we'll talk about in a minute, but the city passed a resolution in late 2019 to expand LEAD. Here's what Councilmember Lisa Herbold is saying about it.
The city intends that LEAD operate at scale by 2023, with scale meaning appropriate funding to accept all priority qualifying arrest and social contact referrals citywide.
Kevin, I wanted to talk about this because, as we have talked about in the past couple of months here, the city shifted its LEAD program into something called co-LEAD back in April as a response to the COVID pandemic. So basically, rather than having police make the interaction that gets people into treatment, it's people from social service agencies now, like REACH, making that connection and referral into the program. And the thing that's really working for co-LEAD that I've noticed here, it's partnering with hotels during the time of COVID. And it sounds like it's working great. You mentioned a lot of people are eager to get into hotels here. I just wonder how much longer that can be maintained and sustained as we emerge from the COVID emergency. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to tell at this point. We don't know how quickly into 2021 we're going to come out of it, right? Hotels certainly, love getting some business this way right now.
Sure.
And another part of it is if there are local hotels that the city and county can buy, right, and operate on their own, right? And both are actively trying to do that.
Yes.
But the flip side of that is we've seen what's going on with the Red Lion in Renton, right?
Yeah, right.
The city of Renton is has said like, no, we
clearing them
this
out.
is causing. They think it's causing issues in the area, surrounding the hotel there, which I think the evidence is unclear as to whether it really is or not, but they're certainly getting feedback from their community saying we're not sure that we like having kind of this hoteling going on here.
Yeah.
But LEAD and co-LEAD have gone through this really interesting evolution because LEAD started out as a diversion program that required that came through referrals from police officers.
From police specifically,
engages with somebody in the street rather than arrest you. We're going to divert you into this program.
Cops made the call,
and there was an option for other outreach organizations and even local businesses to be able to refer people in the program, where SPD would sort of give their blessing and say,
right,
okay,
right,
fine,
that'll work,
and particularly in the last year, as SPD just became completely overwhelmed.
Oh yeah.
That became the bottleneck, right?
Yeah.
Is that SPD they were not processing the referral okays.
Yes.
Right. So nobody was getting into this program.
Right.
So one of the big changes that happened a few months back is they flipped it so that people can get referred, from businesses, from
the service providers,
local organizations, service providers, without SPD's involvement at all. That can just happen directly.
Yeah.
And the city has pumped a bunch of money into this, for hoteling, for other things that really seems to be working.
Right.
And so the program, a lot of the bumps that it really had last year,
look like they're getting smoothed out. Yeah.
Are finally getting ironed out. And it looks like, the program is really, finding its groove now.
Yeah, it is. And there's a few things that are a little bit different than the traditional LEAD program. There's a dedicated medical provider that's involved with this. That's a huge piece of this. There are overnight services. So there's actually someone on staff and a supervisor too, working with this program overnight to help with the referrals there. And I think a big one here, a connection with community resources like Chief Seattle Club, like the Asian Counseling Resource Center, meeting people where they are and trying to make that cultural connection too. I think what we're still waiting on here, Kevin, is a little bit more data. What I heard from the council there was this idea that they're getting in some different feedback from people involved here. 38 interviews through July, December of this year. They've gotten a number of them from people involved in the program, and they're going to work on this through the start of next year. So as we get through March, they're hoping, at least that's their deadline as it looks right now. Are we going to emerge completely from COVID or even halfway from COVID by that point? We don't know, but I think we're going to get a ton more information at that point. I did want to touch on one more thing here, Kevin, here. When it comes to a report that's coming out this week from King County Equity Now with regard to how the city makes investments in participatory budgeting, what are you expecting to see here? This is something that we've been tracking the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, so last Monday, the King County Equity Now group doing this Black Brilliance project,
yes,
gave sort of a preview of it in a presentation to the City Council. They've got their preliminary report, which is sort of required deliverable in their contract, due to be delivered, this Monday, December 21st, and it's supposed to. I'm expecting it to, present early research results. They've been doing the survey, some results from the survey, and I think in particular early recommendations on what the participatory budgeting process should look like. There are a lot of big questions around what the structure of that should look like. They said already last week in their preview that a lot of their focus is going to be on the steering committee. How do you put together a steering committee for this effort? Who should be on it? What are the decisions they're making in terms of how the process goes forward? What issues are going to be identified? What potential proposals are going to get voted on? How the final decisions are made. So, the steering committee is really going to be central to this. And I think seeing kind of the details of, or at least starting to see the details of how that should come together, is going to be a big part of what we'll see in this report.
And I think another piece to this too, just in listening to that presentation, I did not get the feel that this was going to involve some sort of come together moment with the mayor's task force that is working on an equity program of its own there. And I'm concerned about that because I don't see these two things melding. We've talked about this over the past few weeks too. This whole idea of a mayor's task force and this community-driven process, are they going to come together? Is there going to be a conflict down the line? What do you think there? I think that's still an unanswered question from them.
I think it's unanswered, and I think there's a lot of scrutiny that we need to do on both sides of this, right?
Agreed.
I think the Black Brilliance research project has been light on details, and we'll see how light on details it continues to be in the preliminary report.
Skewing towards a lot of younger people it's reaching out to. I mean, a few things like that.
To the extent you're mentioning sort of the early results they showed in their survey results, which shows that it's biased towards younger folks. But then there's issues with the task force, which has been basically opaque. Like
they haven't done it.
None of their meetings are open. They publish no minutes from it, and so they've published super high level agendas. We don't really know when they're meeting or what they're meeting about until after it's done. Nobody gets to watch their meeting either live or after the fact. It's like they're going to be deciding how to distribute $30 million, right? We need information because that's taxpayer money. We need information on how that's working, and that's just a black box right now, and that's not acceptable, right? So on both sides of this, even before we start talking about, as the city council have been pushing for, get the two of them aligned. It's like, just what the heck are they doing?
right. Let's figure that piece out first.
Each of these two has got $30 million that they're in charge of figuring out how it's going to get spent. And that's $60 million of taxpayer money that, there needs to be a plan that the community can get behind.
No joke.
And there's just no details right now on this.
Yeah. As the shirt says from Converge, no excuses. This is what I'm saying here. So got to come up with that piece. All right, we're going to move on to our final section.
We got to get them to Converge.
I know. One of these times we'll get that artwork together.
We got the task force and the Black Brilliance Project to converge.
With no excuses.
With no excuses.
That's what I'm saying. All right, let's move on to our final segment here. What's next? All right, I want to look ahead right now, if we could, Kevin, at what's happening with our state legislature. They're going to be firing up here at the start of January, and I think one piece that we're both keeping a close eye on is some of the interesting developments when it comes to police accountability. Jamie Peterson's working on a bill here. A few others are working in the Black Caucus there for the Dems. I wanted to talk about this. What are you keeping an eye on? What are you expecting to see maybe out of the legislature when it comes to some of these issues of police accountability this session?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of buzz the last month or two as their state legislature has been gearing up for this upcoming session. Looking at things like a stronger decertification process. So, what happens right now with the disciplinary process is that an officer, if it looks like they're going to get fired, then they have an option to resign in advance of that.
Right.
And then basically the disciplinary process just to sort of vaporize this.
Yeah. Right.
So at study level, there's an opportunity to sort of beef that process up so that there's a stronger decertification process. So if somebody, a police officer who's looking at strong, discipline, can't just sort of wiggle their way around that
and move to another department potentially in the state. Yeah.
Looking at the arbitration process and sort of the disciplinary appeals process to kind of clean that up.
Yeah.
Giving cities more bargaining power with the police unions. That's going to be a big one. And particularly for the city of Seattle right now.
Something they've been pushing on for a while. Yeah.
Another thing that's being, two other things that are being pushed on. One is qualified immunity, right? Which has been a big problem.
When police can exercise
police
that.
officers accountable. And then the other is strengthening the rules at the state level for when officers witness misconduct, that they're required to report it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not today. And a lot of folks think that they really ought to be.
And I really think, Kevin, this is work that's been talked about in Olympia for a long time here. But I really feel like these events over the past summer, the protests we've seen or what have you with George Floyd, I think they add some more fuel to the fire here. I don't know if we're going to have the same amount of protest we've seen in Seattle happening in Olympia, but I think the pressure is on here big time for the legislature.
We do have to remember, though, that the state of Washington is a lot bigger than just Seattle.
True.
Right? Seattle's a bubble on this, and they have a lot of strength in Olympia,
King County
in their legislative delegation there. But these issues don't play out the same way across the state as they play in Seattle, right? And I know there are a lot of folks who want to see big action this year, and we may get big action on this, right? But a lot of the legislation that goes through Olympia, gets approved, takes sometimes 2-3 years worth, of repeats before they really get to, even things like, looking at the, recent, don't block the box camera legislation stuff, right? That took 2 to 3 years of iterations.
It requires staying
get
power.
Through that, right?
Same-sex marriage was 20 years, something like that. I mean, these things do take time.
And there's a lot of big issues here, right? And thorny issues, right? It's not necessarily obvious what to do. Things like, decreasing the police union's power. Well, that's going to be super tricky. And labor is divided on that.
Of course.
Right? Labor is a big power in Olympia, and they're going to be somewhat sort of conflicted on this, right? So it's really not clear how far they're going to get. They're certainly going to try. There's a lot of enthusiasm for trying. It's not clear how far they're going to get in 1 year on this.
I'm with you on that. I think the work of equity too has to be something that's ongoing. It's not going to be a check done type of situation here, even if the state is able to put together some sort of legislation this year. And I think it's very important to point that out. All right, Kevin, we got to wrap this thing up here, man. It is our last episode of the year. It's episode 51, and we always try to wrap things up with some tasty treats for your coffee break. And Kevin, I know you've been busy, but I wanted to present to you my daughter's latest creation. They bake them, I eat them. This is a vanilla bean ricotta cookie involved here. So with a sugar glaze on top. First things first, my daughter thanks you very much for the cake recipe. We have some cakes in the house. How you make your store-bought cake mix taste like homemade, that is happening in our house right now.
And did it work?
Worked like a charm. Yeah, my mouth is watering just talking about it. Tune in, folks, to episode 50, because that's got some great stuff there. But there's something about cooking with the ricotta cheese here that has made this, I'm going to say it right now, possibly the fluffiest cookie I have had of all time. Your experience with this, Kevin, because I know you cook with a lot of different things. The ricotta cheese, what's your thought?
Other than lasagna, I don't think I've actually cooked with ricotta cheese. Certainly not desserts. But it looks awesome.
Yeah. Well, you can see me chewing, so clearly it's
I'm a little jealous here. I'm a little jealous sitting here.
Well, I guess we should wrap up with New Year's resolutions. You got anything cooking there, Kevin? Anything at all?
Oh my.
Eat more cookies is one. Possibly.
Get a haircut.
Yeah.
I think, as we're saying, I've spent a lot of time in the last 2 weeks looking at all the data about the COVID vaccines.
Yeah.
I am going to get a COVID vaccine as soon as I'm allowed to.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The data shows very clearly that they're safe. I'm not going to wait, when I get a chance to get one, when my turn comes around, I'm going to be, front of line getting one.
Yep.
So
yep.
I think that's an important resolution.
I think it is
encourage
too.
other people to make the same one.
Right on. Yeah, we'll see what happens next with that as those vaccines get distributed. I did want to talk about a resolution that I'm taking on, and I'm going to pull Kevin along with me on this one, a plan for our patrons, your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug. We've been talking about this offline for a little while. I think we're finally going to be able to pull this through. We're still working on this, but this is my resolution to you, patrons. We're going to come through with this for a certain donation going into 2021. Still working out some of the finances on this one, but looking forward to do that so we can actually enjoy a little bit of podcast love as we clink glasses here remotely. Kevin, what do you think?
Got to follow through on the Brews part of our name. Right?
That's right. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. This has been a year, Kevin. I really appreciate it. I didn't quite know where we'd start back in January when we launched this thing, and we're standing next to each other taping stuff and all that. But I don't know. I'm happy with how it's turned out. What your final thoughts?
Brian, I want to thank you. I mean, there's a ton of work that goes into this beyond just us sitting, on Zoom
sitting
or in a room, recording it. Like there's a lot of planning that goes in, what are the topics, and a lot of production. And you've really just been carrying so much water in this. I'm super appreciative of all the time and effort. And I know there's been a labor of love for you, but
very much so. But a great one. It's worth it. It's worth it to connect with you, Kevin. I got to throw it back at you. The amount of work that you put into to cover local government has been an inspiration for me. It's kicked me into gear to up my game in that regard. And I appreciate that because at the end of the day, I just think these issues are important. And I think a lot of people are reaching out to me and to you to make sure they're getting that information. And I just want to keep bringing it. You know what I mean?
And we need to shout out to Amari and Nikki and all the folks at Converge. They've been just a super partner for us. And we really appreciate them, giving us the airtime for this.
Absolutely. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So thanks to Converge, Kevin, thanks to you. Thanks everybody for tuning into the show. And the next time you want to know what's happening in local politics, listen to Seattle News, Views, and Brews. That'll be happening in 2021 here. You can subscribe on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you listen. Please do support us on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. We do need your help to keep this thing going. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for watching on Converge Media. Until next time, we'll see you. Happy New Year. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2020.